We again have two speakers, one from the Central Eastern European country and one from Ukraine. Melinda Harlov is from Hungary. She's our project partner as well, not from the specific institution, but Melinda assisted us a lot during the application process. Melinda is a PhD candidate at Atelier Department of European Social Sciences and Historiography at Laurent Eötvös University, and a research fellow at Institute for Social and European Studies, Köszer, Hungary. She also gives lectures at McDaniel College in Budapest. Since 2006, she has been working in diverse cultural institutions. She has been also participating in multinational projects, such as preparation of a long-term international research project on the Europeanization process of small-scale settlements in periphery territories. Her research interests are focused on how international norms of UNESCO World Heritage Committee can be adopted to local and national circumstances. Melinda, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank you for the invitation and the possibility to be part of this great project, and thank you for all the suffering community who's still here at almost 5 o'clock. It's a great day, but I know that it's really, really tough to sit and concentrate on everything. So as you could hear, my research into how international or national norms or regulations or requirements can really be adopted on the local level. And I think that can be adopted to this project as well. I would like to bring you a lot of Hungarian examples, and when I was preparing, my main aim was not to show off and not to say, well, Hungary is perfect in terms of cultural values and representations, but after all of the lectures you hear about the bad things of Hungary nowadays, I think I will stick to the good examples so you have an equal view of my country. Also, I felt to be, I think, the best part of being the last presenters, because what I'm going to speak about is mostly what you have already heard, but not on the cultural level. So I'm going to adapt so many ideas of the different experts you have heard today. There were so many ways I wanted to start with, and I think this whole Europeanization process is not something that any country should be, there to be part of it. It's not a contest or a race, or it's not that you have to formulate yourself into something else. I think the only thing what we have to do, we meaning every country of Europe, is to be able to adapt to these common communication tools. So I don't think that Ukraine or any other country should be shamed or felt in between or felt behind. We have been joking during lunchtime about every country has the same representations or same things, and you bring out this in-betweenness just now. And I must admit, Hungary has been the country of in-between for 100 years already. We have poets saying that we are the country, the ship country between East and West, so it's a normal state. It's not something you have to go off. You have, I mean, that's my point. So you might see a lot of very naive or very positive views, which I'm going to discuss now, values, but I will bring you always examples. So my main point is to show that these are adaptable pros and cons of these different values. So let's see. The research was basically, my sources were EU and European Council texts about what is value and what European-ness should be, and also UNESCO's, for instance, this Convention on the Protection and Promotion of Cultural Diversity and Cultural Expressions, as well as, because I'm going to bring you all my Hungarian examples, so I was looking on that, and I used compendium report on Ukraine to have a certain idea, but of course I am really looking for your expertise on that. And also I was looking for evaluations and critiques by scholars as well as practitioners. Is it really possible to do all those nice things? And the steps were I collected these texts, and then I tried to analyze it and look for best practices or main goals or values, and I would then see how it could be adapted. So it's basically do's and don'ts, if you wanted to say it in a very everyday English terms. And now I'm in the phase hoping to discuss with you this adaptability of my findings. Of course, every research has limitations and shortages, and we have to be aware of it. Culture is much more than just cultural heritage, meaning built and intangible heritage, but for the sake of keeping my research focused, I am concentrating just on the built and intangible, tangible or intangible heritage. And so language, media, education, that is all part of culture, is not going to be focused or discussed at this time. I brought you an example. This is an industrial heritage from Budapest, the first photo on your right. And there was a huge discussion whether this monument should be saved or not, and if yes, in what way. But it's not just a building, and it's just a memory of the factory per se, but also it's a case that the whole ground is highly polluted at the moment because of the industrial activities in the past. So is it good to make a cultural spot on a highly polluted ground? So as you can see, the question is much more complex than we can discuss in 20 minutes, but I try to be quick. And also another limitation is that I'm going to bring you only Hungarian examples, but I hope that it's going to give you extra information and some interesting spots. You can see the 9 World Heritage Sites of Hungary on your right bottom corner. It's basically 2 in Budapest, so altogether 8, but there was 2 spots within Budapest. Okay, the structure will be is I'm going to tell you the main values that can be seen both in EU and UNESCO context, and what should be shown and what should be achieved, and then we will discuss some of the pros and cons about that. So one, what you can read and hear about is enforcing diversity, and diversity can be cultural diversity, ethnic diversity, lingual diversity, so basically any kind of diversity, the diversity of expression, which is a very important point, and of course even EU, should I say, advantage itself by saying unity in diversity. So I think being diverse within the country or being diverse from the rest of the team is not something that is not good, it's something that has to be emphasized. So the uniqueness of every local or national character is not a negative thing, it's a plus. And of course, for this aim you can reach or you can form transnational projects, and the other side of this is this very strange aim nowadays that EU wants to have a common cultural heritage of Europe. We can discuss a whole lecture or workshop on that. Why now we are formulating this Europeanness on cultural level, I'm speaking of exclusively, but that's a tool that can be used by every country. For example, strangely enough, just last year Hungary got this nomination of European culture in Sopron, which is near to Sopron, between the Austrian and Hungarian country, to remember the 1989 moment when the border was crossed, and you know, that was the starting point of falling down the Iron Curtain. Well, if you think about what we have just doing at the border of the south, that's really tricky, and it shows that it's not just simply culture, but other politics as well. The images, what you can see are images from the different winter ending festivals around this area. The top one is the Hungarian one, which is intangible world heritage now, and the bottom one is the Bulgarian and the Romanian and Slovakian counterparts of the same event. So you can see that basically the same methods and the same expression appears in every country, but still the Hungarian winter clothing is now a world heritage. Why? The whole point is it's not a context. You have to be proud of yourself, and you have to be you have to show that to your country and to other countries as well. One more term about this: the Hungarian Winter Clothing Festival in Mohács is basically the event of the Serbian minority in that territory. So Hungarian World Heritage nomination is due to a migration group's winter festival. So that's about diversity, I think. Another very important term is this transcultural consciousness. It sounds very academic, but it's simply the fact that if different cultures live together on a local setting, then they form a new kind of culture or way of life. So as one of the famous Hungarian monument protectionists said, well, you know, and that's an allusion to the image on the bottom, the German minorities' buildings and building structures in Hungary, which is a heritage now, it's totally different from, or there are different features if you compare that to the German house in Germany. So every group who are living together forming a new way of expression, and if you are aware of that, that this is a new term, it's not a Soviet or Russian or whatever, it is a local characteristics, then you can transform this negative past and evaluation of identity, hard task, into the celebration or at least acknowledgement of the local people and the local culture. One more word, the upper part is the dance house movement in Hungary. The folk music and folk dance is a big thing in Hungary, and we do have dance houses whenever we get together, even in city context, and dance folk dances, and we dance Hungarian, Bulgarian, Serbian, and you name it, all these different folk dances out of each other, and there is no differences, and there is a different way how Hungarian dance, Bulgarian folk dance, of course, because that's transformed through the ages, that's transcultural consciousness. Okay, freedom and rights, of course it's very important all the time, but you have to know it that we are culture and cultural heritage, you can emphasize these, like equality, such as gender equality, that's important. Artistic freedom, so of course it's very important to emphasize or support the national characteristics and the acknowledgement or representation of national culture, but you should let the artists do what they want to do. And that's a very key right that can be emphasized and expressed by cultural heritage movement. Participatory action, that's basically one of the main points of my whole lecture. It's local civil society, scholars, and for-profits, and it should be involved in all the steps. I bring you the examples of Horlopő. It's a small village in Hungary, now World Heritage. This is the first World Heritage site in Hungary since 1987. And during the preparation and nomination process, of course, you have to know, 87, we were still under, and not democratic, we were not a democratic country back then. But basically what happened is that the whole nomination process went through without asking the locals. So they didn't know that what's going to happen, they didn't know that the buildings are going to be protected, they are not going to be able to modernize anything. And what was the answer? The whole village stand up and move out. And they built a new village next to this monument village, and it became almost like a skansen, or like an open-air museum. And the problem is the World Heritage nomination says it's a living village. Well, no one lives there today. So if you leave out the locals from the beginning, that's not going to work. I'm speeding up. Mobility is that you have already heard about that. Only two important things. It should be, of course, a balanced flow of culture, goods and services. It sounds very nice. What is important, it should be two ways. So it's not just your culture should be spread within the country and to Europe, but you should let in the other culture as well. I promise you to give you negative examples from Hungary. Well, unfortunately, our government finally recognized that the intellectuals and the young generations are leaving the country in a quite high percentage. So they try to make the youngsters stay in a way that you will have free education, free university, high-level education if you sign a contract and says you will be there after your graduation for 5 years constantly, and they check you. So that's what I said, no free mobility at all. But let's move on. Creative industries, I don't know if you have heard about that. Creative industries and smart city and cultural industries are modern terms that are very famous, especially in Western Europe, and they are not really defined well. But we can talk about in the Q&A session about that, so I'm not going to go into details. The only things about Hungary is that we are not well on that level either. There's a small city, Kőszeg, you have heard about it. I am the member of this institute that is working there on, it's basically a city improvement plan, how you should use creative industries, cultures, minds, intellectuals in order to have the life of the city and the improvement better organized but increasing. And one tool would be diverse media and digitalization. So that's the other program. So how you can achieve this whole very nice aims and glorification of culture whatsoever? What you need definitely is a very huge amount of data. So you do, as you have heard, the 6,000 requests, that's the minimum. So you have to have huge amount of information. You have to have it, as you all know, updated, comprehensive, and whatnot. You have to have monitoring and evaluation methodology that should be self-respected. So conferences or workshops like this, when someone asks about your methodology or questions your results, that's a key term to do with, and it should be done. And again, this is what we are just doing. The formulation of the shared problems would lead you to good results. I'm sorry that it's under buttered, but so I read it out. The most important thing is to strengthening the value chain of creation, production, distribution or dissemination, and access of culture. As a summary, I would have basically two recommendations. One is the involvement of public or civil society on all states. You can see it's again Holyoke, the same village which I told you about, and you have all of these now forming cultural and civil society initiatives. They try to be part of it. And the other one is, I think, you have to monitor and adapt the valuable initiatives in advance in terms of national, international one. This is a very funny picture, yeah, that says what should be Europe like, or how should it be perfect, and use all the stereotypes in a negative way. So what you have already heard from all the experts, it's not just simply swallow all the things what you have heard or what you are asked to do, but you adapt what is really good and possible to to implement. And before I finish, I would like to say that it's not a question, again, which we have already discussed, whether Ukraine is part of Europe or not. It's not a question at all. The task is to incorporate the uniqueness of Ukraine with all the diversity and problems and everything to the contemporary international discourse. So you have to use the tools, you have to know how to play the games, but you do not have to give up. And this is basically a painting of one of the greatest Hungarian painters, showing one of the most typical Hungarian area. It's the Great Plain. And why I chose it, because it has sunshine and it has thunder at the same time, and you have active participants, and you can't see, but here is a guy just standing and looking at it. So you have to be active in order, but keep your uniqueness in order to reach any kind of success. Thank you. I am not perfect in changing, so I don't really want to see my email address anytime.
Let me introduce the second speaker for today's panel, Dr. Natalia Palagesha from Ukraine. Natalia is an expert on Europeanization and Euro-integration. She has been working as an expert at the National Institute for Strategic Studies and a lecturer at the National Academy of Public Administration for more than 10 years. She pursued a PhD degree in political science. Previously, she graduated from the Institute of International Relations of Taras Shevchenko National University in Kyiv. Natalia is an author of the monograph Ukraine in the Wars of Ideas of Postmodern and a number of scientific articles on European identity. Natalia, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good evening, dear friends and colleagues. It's very nice for me to be here today with you at this seminar. As I have already told Nadia Breaker, I am sure that it's very important both for Ukrainian science and for Ukrainian society to address to the problem of Europeanization. And I highly appreciate the efforts of the seminar organizers. On the one hand, I do think that the lack of understanding of the substance and mechanisms of Europeanization is the very reason because of which 20 years of Ukraine's head into European Union haven't had no results. On the other hand, I've been very enthusiastic about the idea to hold this seminar because on my mind it's very important to join the knowledge about Europeanization of European and Ukrainian scientists. The experience of Europeanization of the EU member states is also very interesting for us and can be very helpful because, as we know, the aim of this seminar is to find and to define ways of Europeanization for Ukraine. Europeanization process in the countries which are now the members of the European Union differs sharply from the Europeanization process of Ukraine. And you know, the main word of my report will be difference, and I want to emphasize on it. So speaking about the Europeanization, we can speak about it in several aspects, and I want to add to your theoretical frame that what we can speak about the Europeanization as idea and a political project, about the Europeanization in Western Europe, about the Europeanization in the countries which have become the members of the European Union, I mean the former countries of Warsaw Bloc, and particularly about the Europeanization of Ukraine. What I would like to emphasize in my report that sceneries of the Europeanization for Ukraine must be different compared to the EU member states. There are several reasons for it. Contemporary realities of Ukrainian society are very different comparing the realities of the EU country. To explain this difference, I have to use such word as Sovietization, as has already been used here. From my point of view, we have the dilemma, Sovietization against Europeanization. New member states of the EU, I mean post-Soviet states, from my point of view, were not so Sovietinized, so deeply as Ukraine was. From my point of view, this is the main reason because of which desovietization and Europeization of Ukraine is going so slowly and hasn't been resulted in EU membership for 20 years. In many aspects, Sovietization remains the reality for Ukraine. So to speak about desovietization and Europeanization, we need to understand why Sovietization was so successful in Ukraine and why it is so difficult to deconstruct it now, and why it should be done to speed up the Europeanization. In both cases, we speak about Sovietization, and when we speak about Sovietization and Europeanization, we speak about identity construction. I mean about some kind of supranational identity construction. Soviet Union and the European Union are comparable in sense of constructing some kind of collective identity of their citizens. In both cases, it is supranational identity in its nature. In the case of the Soviet Union, it was Soviet identity, and in the case of the EU, it is now European identity or EU identity, as you know. So we have a lot of mechanisms of constructing supranational identities, but here I would like to emphasize that theoretically these mechanisms are, I mean, in the context of the Soviet Union and in speaking about the European Union, are the same for both identities. Very often I think that the ideologists of the European integration have taken very many ideas about making the Union from the Soviet Union. Because the project of creating Soviet identity, Soviet people, you know, was very successful. I know that speaking about the supranational identity, very few scientists speak about identity in language in terms of common language, which language can be a common for communication for the people, for the members of this union. From my point of view, the creation of the common communication space of a supranational union can be maybe on the first place among all these mechanisms of supranational identity construction, because no one process of unification is possible if people within a supranational union are able to communicate and to understand each other. Among all markers of identity, language is the most powerful, I think. The Soviet Union is a very vivid illustration of this thesis. Within the Soviet Union, Russian language was a lingua franca for Soviet people. Like in a nation state, this language was used in policy, economy, education, culture, and other social spheres of the USSR. All Soviet people spoke Russian. Studying this language was obligatory and was imposed by Soviet educational people. Soviet Union, the fact Soviet Union itself was possible because all Soviet people were able to communicate within each other in one language. So Russian language was one of the most powerful mechanisms of Sovietization. The project of European Union has taken a lot from experience of the Soviet Union concerning the mechanisms of supranational identity construction. And in the case of European Union, such language of a communication has become English. So in the US, in the European Union, English language have become such a mechanism of Europeanization like Russian language was in the USSR. European countries which have recently become the members of the European Union, Russian was not so deeply enrooted in social life of these societies, like in the former Soviet republics, among which was Ukraine. After the fall of the Soviet Union, Russian has been relatively easily replaced by English. Without English, it has been absolutely impossible to become a member state of the European Union. So many governments have pursued politics of derussification and Englishization, as it is called now. Introducing English in their countries in education, mass media, culture, and other spheres of social life. For now, very few people in the European Union speak Russian, and more than half Europeans speak English. Absolutely another story is about Ukraine. During more than 20 years of independence, Russian language remains to be dominant in all spheres of Ukrainian society. In contrast with Europe, where almost all people speak English, in Ukrainian, almost all Ukrainians speak Russian. Russian language remains to be a mediator, a source of information about external world for Ukrainians. In accordance with last data of Ukrainian Institute of Sociology, only 1.6% of Ukrainians speak English. Russian language remains prevailing in mass media, education, and culture. Working at the National Institute of Strategic Studies, I wrote a lot about it. I proposed that it's necessary to take some national programs or national strategy to tackle this problem. And only last year, President Poroshenko announced that 2060 has to be a year of English in Ukraine. So in the context of Englishization, Ukraine officially is making only first steps, I would say. For now, as far as I know, Ministry of Education is being developing some kind of strategies of Englishization, but a lot of time has been lost. Prevalence of Russian in Ukraine instead of English is the only part of this huge problem. For the moment, from the moment of creation of the European Union, a lot has been done for creation of a common European communication space, and I think, from my point of view, contemporary EU language policy can be divided into two parts. The first part, policy of making English as a second language for EU citizens, and policy of translation. In EU is being developed even huge language industry of translation. So Ukraine is out of this process, and you know what is I have. It seems to me I have 5 minutes more. Yeah. How to explain what's going on with English and Europeanization here in Ukraine? For example, if you take syllabus, any syllabus of any subject of any universities in Ukraine, you will see that the whole list of literature, recommended literature on a subject, consists in 90% of books and articles written by Russian scientists, and absolutely no literature recommended in English, for example. If we translate, you know that there are very few articles of Ukrainian scientists in European scientific journals, and you know, from my point of view, it is not because Ukrainian scientists don't know English or do not speak English, because very often we don't have in Ukrainian language very often it's impossible to translate some text from Ukrainian into English because we have lack of some terminology which give us a chance to explain in English correctly some events, some events. So, speaking about the political recommendations, what should be done? Of course, Russian should be replaced by English, I think, in all possible spheres of social life in Ukraine. And I think that very powerful means of Europeanization must be established in Ukraine, the center of translation of the documentation of the European Union. Because it's absolutely necessary, because Ukrainian citizens don't have any access to information about European Union and from the European Union. So the industry of translation must be developed in Ukraine. And I think that Ukrainian language must be placed on the side of the European Union, making all documents published in the EU available for the citizens for the citizens of Ukraine. And I'm sure that we have to create a new English-Ukrainian dictionary and dictionary of European integration to get rid of the senses which are in Russian, English-Russian dictionaries, remaining as legacy of the Soviet Union. Thank you for your attention.
And we are opening Q&A session. Questions, comments, solutions, please.
Just an example, first of all, for your presentation. I've got one question. Look, well, in recent years, we observe all those processes in Great Britain and Spain, of all historical regions trying to establish autonomy or sovereignty, all within the European Union, right? Whether this process of diversity, diversity building and expanding and deepening, I exaggerate, but why it happen that it will deconstruct the European universal values, conceptual network, whether there is a risk of that. So this is basically my question.
Are we going to that question? No. Okay. Thank you for your question. Of course, whenever you go to a direction, there is a risk of going to extreme. It doesn't matter which direction you go. I am not an expert on this question or on EU. I'm just concentrating on cultural heritage and this topic. But there is no way to unite EU culturally to one without any direction, because every nation is basically defined by their own history and their own culture. So if you are not able to unite people into one, like Soviet characteristics, especially in this part of Europe, it's going to be, you know, a red light in every mind that they want to kill our own identity. Then the other way around is to connect diversity. Of course, there have to be limitations, like the language. You can hear. You have to have some kind of communication tool. Many argues that the whole World Heritage idea or nomination with the fixed criteria is something that unites and basically pretend the possibility of being diverse, but you have to find the middle way. How we do that, no one knows. What I can tell you from this very specific World Heritage nomination, I had read papers from the people who started this whole process, and they said, you know what, we didn't thought that's going to be as many World Heritage sites. Now they are not able to say no to include more and more people, and by including more and more, you have to diverse also the criteria. So it's basically, it goes out from their hands in a way, of course, but you have to, as I said about the methodology, you have to also self-monitoring and look for the next session. You have this in mind of separating and losing unity by enforcing diversity, then you have to look for solutions that's acceptable for the member states, but still keep the car moving.
I have a question for
Natalia.
You make a parallel between the way how the Soviet Union actually tried to unify different nations and how the European Union tried to unify its member states. And you draw the line that it's actually language and the use of Russian in Soviet time, and then English in this time. And my question is, if you really see the parallel, if you really mean that it's the same. Because from my point of view, Russian language during the Soviet period was a little, the meaning was a little bit different, because you have superior nation, and language of those superior nations was actually put to all the different states who belongs to the Soviet Union. And nowadays, when you have English language, with all my respect towards England and Britain, this is not really the leading nation in the European Union. And so the superiority of the language is not from the side of the power, but mainly because of the business, mainly because it's convenient. And from my point of view, this is difference. So I'm not really sure if the parallel is really okay in this one particular case. And I wanted to say something else, but
Thank you for the question.
I also had something on that. Is it sensible to
collect? It relates to the previous one.
It doesn't. It's on a similar topic. It's looking exactly at that claim of similarity between identity building in the Soviet Union and identity building in the European Union. I think we all agree that language is important. I'd be really interested to see.
I do apologize.
It's related to the previous one, so I think that it would be also easier.
That's the idea, yeah. I'm interested to see what you have to say about that, but also certain other key differences that exist within Soviet, or existed within the Soviet Union compared to the European Union, namely practically every other form of power relations and social relations and economic relations. How would you account for that massive level of difference that structures interactions between people, firms, states, diplomats, practically every level of interaction? You have a very different model there, yet you claim there's a parallel. So I would be interested to see how you justify that.
Immediately we are now speaking about the different ideologies. Of course, I knew that that my statement will be very, very provocative. But of course, I agree with all your statements. The only difference between the European Union and the Soviet Union is an ideology. The Soviet Union had the ideology of totalitarian, Marxism-Leninism, maybe, yes, and the ideology of the European Union is democracy. And the mechanisms, and now we can begin to speak about all the peculiarities of relations between different powers and so on. I spoke about the mechanisms of identity construction. They are all equal, the same for the European Union and for the Soviet Union. If you can compare them, you can try show me the difference between them.
With great pleasure.
This is really provocative.
Sorry, Anita, can you come closer because you're so far?
I have a good voice. You can hear me. Well, to say that the only difference between Soviet Union and the European Union is only ideology, that means that the only difference between Hitler and Putin is ideology. There is no other difference, because the ideology is something quite crucial when we compare something authoritarian and something that is democratic. And this is first my remark. So it's quite remarkable difference. And the second, I know we are speaking about building European identity a lot. However, I don't think that such kind of process is really very well structured at the European level, and they knew what they are doing, they knew what they are pushing for. I don't think so. It's much more diverse, it's much more give them just boundaries and then you form the identity you want to have. And not like during the Soviet period when you can keep your kind of, I'm not really expert in Soviet Union, but well, we could be Slovaks. However, whatever we wanted to do, we have the approval from the Soviet Union, and this is difference, I would say. It's not the same. For me, it's not comparable. I'm sorry. But you can, again, react and try to persuade me.
I've spoken about it only at the theoretical level. And concerning the mechanisms of European identity construction, you can see, you can have a look at a single European Act of 1986. And all the mechanisms of the European identity construction are listed there. And contemporary European politics with identity construction is described very strictly in this document, you know. And for example, if you want, we can list and analyze all of them, if you don't mind, all the mechanisms. Do we have time?
Unfortunately, we do not have time to discuss all the mechanisms, but I do believe that if it was so easy to debate European identity construction only based on one document or two documents, we wouldn't have had this huge amount of literature that is appearing again and again, what actually the European identity is. But thank you very much for your question and for your answer. Any other questions? Melinda has something to
Yeah,
add.
I just wanted to comment also in this discussion. Two things came to my mind. One is that basically if we speak about this very theoretical level, then you can come up with the Habsburg Empire or even the United States. So whenever you combine different communities, you have to have certain rules. So I think it would be need more similarities than just that, and then compare the two efforts. That just came to my mind because we always in Hungary joking about that the biggest Hungarian composer, Ferenc Liszt, doesn't speak in Hungarian at all. One of the biggest poets of Hungary is called Petőfi, but originally called Petrovic, totally Hungarian name, you can recognize that. So in that way, of course, we are truly Hungarian, and Hungarian language is one of our key characters to define, but we have to face it that the context main cause diversity. So I think you need more context to compare it, because it's basically just simply what I also said in my presentation, that your uniqueness should be able to communicate in this discourse. You have to use the tools, and language is one tool, but you can use it in so many discourses. That's only my comment. And about the Europeanness and whether we know what European Union do in terms of creating European ideology, I always hear maybe it's just Hungary and Hungarian intellectuals, but so it's an extra information and not my point of view, but according to many Hungarian intellectuals, Europeanness and European identity can be defined, for example, by the Bible, because every nation uses it in a certain way. It becomes part of your literature, it becomes part of your fine art examples, and you can use this text, and it's a kind of every nation reflects on that. So these kind of things that has happened way before EU are some of the roots that can be the key for Europeanization. I am not an expert on that. I have not discussed it, but this is one voice from the Hungarian intellectuals that might be interesting for you.
Thank you very much for this voice. Would you like to react on this comment?
Yes. Thank you. You remember me that I can take as an example one more very successful project of supranational identity construction with the same mechanisms as the European Union uses American identity. It's a supranational identity on its nature, but the mechanisms of its construction, comparing to the Soviet and with the European Union, obviously on the theoretical level.
I'm afraid we are opening a Pandora box speaking about American national identity.
But different are only the markers of identity, if to speak theoretically, but the mechanisms are the same.
From what I see, we need badly one more workshop to debate identity only. Thank you very much for the speakers.
Thank you.
And thank you very much for all the audience. Just two more remarks, perhaps. First of all, we will definitely circulate the conclusions and the recommendations with which we will come up, I guess, like in 2 weeks after we are still working on them together. And tomorrow, this is the announcement only for the experts. Tomorrow we will have working breakfast. Sorry for being so strict and to have the breakfast working, but we actually decided to do that to give you more free time during the afternoon to enjoy the city tour. Hopefully we will have a nice weather. And all the participants who agreed and who expressed their will to be updated about the project development will also receive these recommendations and conclusions, and we are really encouraging you to contribute with your ideas and with your visions, indicating your affiliation and your field of expertise. And we are very thankful to all our speakers, all our project partners. We are very thankful to the International Visegrad Fund for their support. We are thankful for the technical assistance to the Czech Embassy in Ukraine and to our project team, and we are really expressing our great will and readiness to debate Europeanization in Ukraine within different future activities, because again I would like to underline that this is the first meeting, and hopefully this network of experts will work together on Europeanization in Ukraine. And we are really encouraging you and inviting you to apply for the international conference for those who are really interested in Eastern neighborhood and Eastern neighborhood, Eastern partnership, Europeanization as well. I think it really feels that
The next. Just click on the icon. Okay.
I will try like that. Yes. This is Eurint conference, the 5th edition, that is going to be held on the 21st of May in Iași, in Romania. It's called Eastern Partnership Under Strain, Time for Rethink. You can check the website link, and we are really encouraging you to apply. The deadline for grants is the end of January. So keep it in mind. Thank you very much, and see you next time.